Hello, everyone. I'm Erin Essen, ECI's Vice President of Research and Analytics, and I'd like to welcome you today to the U.S. Trends webinar based on the Global Business Ethics Survey. A few housekeeping items before we get started. This meeting is being recorded. Please put yourself on mute unless you are a presenter. Thank you very much. Next slide, Skip. So for today's program, we are going to be giving some high-level findings from a recently released U.S. Trends report. You can find the report at the link shown on the screen, or you can go to ethics.org, click on Knowledge Center, and then Global Business Ethics Survey. After we have a few high-level findings from the research, we will have a moderated panel discussion with ethics and compliance practitioners who will give their insights and thoughts about the data. As you have questions, we welcome the audience to add those questions to the chat, and we will pull from those questions into the discussion. So for the presenters today, Skip Lowney, Senior Survey Researcher from the Ethics and Compliance Initiative, will be giving the high-level overview of the research. And then after that, we will go into a moderated panel discussion. Michael Rosen, Managing Director of the Ethics and Compliance Office, Risk and Brand Protection from Deloitte, will be moderating the panel of ethics and compliance practitioners. Keturah Pastel, Director of Business Ethics at Thrivent, and Justin Ross, Chief Compliance Officer at Cisco Corporation, are our panelists today. I want to give a big thank you to Deloitte for funding this report and say that this report would not be possible without that support. So thank you very much, Deloitte. And then next, for those of you who aren't familiar with our Global Business Ethics Survey research, this research really looks at the employee perspective of ethics in the workplace. ECI has been conducting this research since 1994, so a long time. We started out doing the research with US employees, and then over the years, we started adding employee perspectives from other countries around the globe. The latest iteration of this research is actually our largest. We had over 75,000 employees participate in the survey from 42 different countries. Please be sure to put yourself on mute. And for today's session, we will just be discussing the US data and looking at trends over time of the US data. If you would like to learn more about our global data, please go to ethics.org, Knowledge Center, and then Global Business Ethics Survey, and you can access our other reports. So with that, I will pass things over to Skip to give the overview of the data.
Thank you, Erin. Really appreciate everyone being here today, and I'm looking forward to the discussion that comes later from our panelists, and then we're also looking forward to questions from our audience. So we're working with the subset of individuals who are working in private and publicly traded companies in the U.S. And big overview, starting from the top, most ethics outcomes have improved since 2020. And when we just talk about ethics outcomes, we are looking at those conditions or those experiences employees have and that are the result of ethics and compliance in an organization. So we're talking about the levels of pressure, observed misconduct, reporting of that misconduct, retaliation if reporting, satisfaction after reporting. So those are our outcomes, but we'll focus on a few of those today. And as you see, most have improved since 2020, but the reporting rate has declined. So that's one of those 6 that has gone downwards. The other thing that we consider is the ethical culture strength. And ethical culture is really a collection of behaviors that take place within an organization. So we're looking at top management setting the tone at the top. We're looking at a supervisor setting a good example. So coworkers supporting their coworkers in their ethics and ethical efforts. So we're looking at an array of behaviors across different collections of employees. And from that, we find out about the agreement, the perception that these employees in organizations see these things and perceive them taking place around them. And when they do, that's the proxy for being in a strong ethical culture. Those things aren't happening, that's a weak ethical culture. And as seen here, and this report discusses trends from 2013 to 2023, it's declined, the strength of that ethical culture. One of the things that we found this time is we looked at on-the-road employees, obviously with the big shift to remote work environments, people actually working then still on site, and then employees who work on the road and have, for a long time. But we have found that the on-the-road employees are at a heightened risk. However, good news is regardless of where an employee works, culture matters. And we'll go into that a little bit very soon. But the significance of culture is that a good culture, a powerful, a strong one, will reduce pressure and will reduce levels of observed misconduct. So there's the benefit to that. And it can be found in all the different work locations. So here are those improvements. We see that the pressure to compromise standards compared with 2020, there's been a 41% reduction from 29% of employees saying they observed something in the past 12 months at their workplace, down to 17%. I'm sorry, this is pressure. That's pressure to compromise standards. So that's to do something actually wrong, not just self-pressure, but pressure to do something wrong, whether it comes from the self or externally. So that's gone down. The observed misconduct has also gone down. That went from 50% in 2020 to 46%. That observed misconduct we measure by looking at 26 different types of misconduct that can take place in an organization, such as abusive behavior, retaliation, favoritism, environmental violations, falsifying records, bribery, quite a broad range. And the observed misconduct value of 46% means that of the respondents, of the people in the US, 46% of them saw at least one of those things, and many saw many more than one of those things. Reporting, we're going to get to that next, but we see that retaliation also went down. That changed from 66% to 49%. So 2/3 of individuals, of employees in the US experienced retaliation after reporting, and that's gone down to 49%, so half. Now, do consider that that's not of all the employees that are out there. That is a reduced amount. So first, someone has to observe misconduct, and then the reporting, how many of those reported, and then of those reporters, how many perceived retaliation. So this is a subset. It does translate into, though, if you were to look at 100 million people and look at all these numbers, that would be 16 million people. If we're looking at 50 million in, let's say the private sector, then we're talking about 8 million people. So these are substantial quantities of people receiving retaliation. Here's where the reporting has declined. This is not as favorable. We would want that higher percentage that we saw in 2017, 75%. Even higher would be better. But this is based on all those types of misconduct and reporting of any of them. So if someone saw one item, they reported it, that counts. If they saw 5 items and they reported one of them, that still counts as reporting. So there was some activity brought to the attention of their organization. as noted, ethical culture strength has declined. That, as you can see from here, from 2013 to 2023, has gone down, back up, and then back down. So started at 60% in 2013, and that 60% is made up of two groups of individuals. One group, as we see, the 17%, that's the lowest section of that stacked bar on the left. Those individuals are considered to be in a strong ethical culture. A strong ethical culture is one in which the employee strongly agreed that all these different behaviors were taking place amongst all these different employees. So top management was setting the tone of doing the right thing. Their supervisor was supporting them. Their coworkers were supporting them in their ethical efforts. People were setting a good example. They all strongly agreed with that. The next category, the strong leaning, there's some, it's not necessarily a strong agreement in those cases. They might have agreed. They might have said, well, I'm not sure to some of those behaviors, but predominantly they're saying, yeah, all in, there is a strong, these things are taking place in my organization. And then as we go to the other end, where we have the, I'm going to squint for a second, the 10% at the top of that bar, those individuals are strongly disagreeing that that the other people in their organization are doing these things. So they're not hearing from top management, to do the right thing, and they're not seeing people held accountable. That's even yet one of the other behaviors that's considered when we study culture. But coming down to a 56% value here in 2023, as we see, comprised of 40% and 16%. One thing that we can see if we look across all 4 years is that the group that is in this strong ethical culture, regardless of which year, it's about 16, 17% from 2013 to the left there, and then over to the right, 16% in 2023. Where the shift took place was in that mid ground. And so people were, solidly in a weak culture, or they were solidly in a strong culture, but that gray zone between a weak leaning, strong leaning, that's where that movement was taking place. So what's so significant about that? And here on the right of the slide, we see that strong ethical cultures decrease pressure and misconduct. In fact, I'll put some numbers to this in a moment, but where there's a strong ethical culture compared with a weak ethical culture, pressure will decrease 74%. In this specifically, in 2023, what that meant was that of the individuals who are in that weak culture set, 28% of them felt pressured to compromise standards. In the strong culture set, 7% felt pressure to compromise standards. 4 times a reduction, 4 times over is substantial. And certainly anything less than 10% of individuals feeling pressure is a great goal and a great accomplishment in an organization. With respect to misconduct and observing of that, again, the impact of culture on that brings it down 80% from that in a weak culture into a strong culture. In a weak culture, 87% of individuals said that they observed misconduct. In a strong culture, 18%. So basically 9 out of 10 to 2 out of 10, substantial. And when an individual is in an organization where 9 out of 10 employees are observing misconduct, that has to be overwhelming. If it's only 2 people observing misconduct, one would imagine that misconduct can be dealt with, and it will also not necessarily potentially influence their perception of the environment and maybe help with keeping them from feeling as though there'd be no hope for anything, that the misconduct is rampant, and in fact, why bother to do anything? So, here's where we started looking as noted at the beginning, ethics outcomes are least favorable for on-the-road employees. we found, and these numbers show for pressure on the left there, observed misconduct in the middle, and retaliation on the right, that for remote employees, they were least likely to feel pressure, observe misconduct, or experience retaliation. And that's not necessarily consistent. There's a little dip there in the experience retaliation. One would hope that the on-site employees would have had a different number, but nevertheless, it's in their favor. I'm sorry, I've got that actually back. It's in their favor to have a lower number rather than be in that middle level, somewhere between remote and on the road. So, and when we were looking at this, we defined remote employees in the survey as those who are at home or an equivalent off-site work location. On-site employees were those who worked at one of the organization's work sites. And on the road, for example, they would be at a client or a changing work site, or literally on the road moving around, different place every day. But they're not, they might have a home desk that they come to and check in at. However, their work location does shift. Now, when it came to reporting, a couple of things to see here are that the differences are, again, for remote employees, different. But in this case, on the road, employees had the best results, or the better results, or the best, because there's three groups here, where in 2020, 85% of them reported their observation of misconduct. And in 2023, 78% reported. That exceeds what we see in the remote work environment, where 68% in 2020 reported the misconduct they observed, and 59% in 2023. On-site did again land in the middle. One thing that's very instructive about this is the pattern appears in 2020 and 2023. So if we look at remote, on-site, and on the road, it's 68%, 69%, and 85%. It ascends in 2020. And then again in 2023, 59%, 63%, and 78%. We also, when we look at culture, we see something similar again, sort of the same patterns, the remote, on-site, and on the road. There's that difference, higher. In this case, we go back the other direction, where being a remote employee is a better condition. So they have a stronger culture, 19%, in the same way that they had better ethics outcomes as well, more favorable, so less pressure. They have a stronger ethics culture. Unlike with the reporting, these are pretty constant across the two iterations. So 19% in 2023 and in 2020 and 2023 of individuals who worked remotely believe that or perceive that they're in a strong ethical culture. 15, 16% for the on-site, and then on the road, 9 and 13%, lower than the other two, and a little different, but nevertheless, at least a little bit consistent. And then, so we looked at taking this apart and looking at the impact of culture on pressure and on misconduct. And regardless of where an employee works, culture matters. If they work in a strong culture, they are less likely to feel pressure to compromise standards or observe misconduct. And we see some of these differences here that are quite substantial. For remote employees, 26%, this is the top left, of remote employees who work in a weak ethical culture, 26% feel pressure, whereas in a strong ethical culture, 2% feel pressure. We go below with observed misconduct, that difference is 77% and 9%. as we saw and what we learned earlier, the outcomes for on-the-road employees were worse, but there was a difference nevertheless in being those employees who are in a weak versus a strong ethical culture. And while 34% is higher than on-the-road employees feel pressure, and that compares to 26% of remote employees feeling pressure, in a stronger ethical culture, that 34% dips to 9%. So the impact is that culture matters regardless. As a wrap up, just to go back to these points, most ethics outcomes have improved. Reporting, however, did not. That declined. Ethical culture strength declined since 2013, looking way back. And on the road employees, to sum it up, they're at a heightened risk. But on the good news, culture matters regardless of work location. That wraps it up for me. And we'll now shift over to the moderated question and answer session with Mike leading that, and Keturah and Justin.
Great. Thank you so much. And let me say thank you, Everett and Skip, for organizing and hosting today's webinar on the evolving landscape of ethics and compliance in the workplace, focusing on the ECI's GBES US Trends Report. And hello, everyone that joined us today. So, before we engage with Justin and Keturah on the evolving landscape in ethics and compliance, just to backtrack, we just heard from Skip about the US trends that came out of the report, that strong ethical culture is declining, that despite gains in some outcomes, reporting rates are down. And lastly, but certainly not least, where an employee works matters as it relates to the perception of an ethical culture. So with that, I want to bring these topics to the fore. We're going to turn to our panelists to hear about ethical culture trends and practices. And Justin, I'm going to ask you the first question. Given the ongoing complexity in the business environment today, how are organizations elevating ethics and integrity to keep pace with increased ethical, reputational, and brand risk?
Well, Mike, it's definitely not easy, and that's why that's what keeps compliance officers like Keturah and I up at night. But look, I think there's a couple of things that we do, and that I think that everyone can do. One is to keep the company's values in mind. So no matter what's happening at a macro level, really staying true to your values. I'll give you an example. So we all know about the administration's sort of pause on FCPA enforcement, and there's going to be less focus on FCPA. And companies were like, what should we do? What should we do here? And I think most companies, at least the ones that I've talked to, are like, look, we're going to keep doing what we're doing. We're not going to change. We're not going to say, okay, we can bribe now, or let's take more risk in bribery. We're going to stick to our values, and our values are we are not going to bribe. We're not going to make improper payments. So I think that's a key. As long as you got that foundation and basis that your employee base and you work from, and that's your values, I think that can help you to navigate. A couple other things. Look, I think keeping a focus on a speak up culture is absolutely important as well. So we've got to keep that going regardless of what's going on. Look, if you can't, there's ways that you can track regulations. There's ways that you could put controls in to detect misconduct, but still one of the absolutely key components of a compliance program in detecting misconduct is the ethics line, frankly, is there a speak up culture. So I think focusing on that, maintaining that value. And then look, I know this is way easier said than done, but trying to stay proactive rather than reactive with all the trying to keep pace is hard, but if you can establish programs and processes that can help you be a little bit more proactive, looking ahead. I know right now it's hard to anticipate anything. Day by day, things change. But if there's things you can put in place, controls, whatever, to try to stay ahead of these changes, I think that's the best way to handle it.
Absolutely. And we're going to cover more about a speak up culture in a bit. But before we move on, Keturah, I'll turn to you. Anything else to add?
A couple thoughts. I noticed with what Skip was sharing, ethical culture strength has declined overall since 2013, but that strong ethical culture has remained consistent. And so there are people out there, what that tells me, that are able to drive that continued strength, right? And I was thinking when he said that about the quote, I'm sure some of you have heard this, to paraphrase something about, we've never been in as much change as we are now, and it'll never be this little again. And so I think that getting to what Justin was saying, going back to the basics, who are you? What is your group identity? Are you consistently communicating that? And just to share some examples of proactive reminders that we've done, because I always like bringing in some of the tactical. One of the things we did last year is we used our annual ethics training to do a reminder about our social media policy, specifically in advance of the elections. We did not have issues with that, and I think part of it is because we did that proactive reminder, and that's a repetition. We've started to do that in presidential and mid-year election cycles. We do other things like remind people of expectations about behavior, drinking. You're still responsible for your behavior if you are drinking at a corporate event that happens. So when we gather people together, just putting that reminder of who we are, what are our behavior expectations. Again, those behavior reminders as part of the event sign up, having that drip methodology to just keep reminding people of who we are. Because tone at the top is clearly important, but you need that consistent messaging throughout from your peers, from your leader, from tone at the top, the executives, all the way through.
Great point. Great point. Katora, I'm gonna stay with you for another minute or so for our next question. The U.S. Trends Report noted that the overall rate of observed misconduct has declined since 2020. What do you see as some of the factors causing this decline? And keeping in mind that data from the 2020 GBS report was collected from August through September 2020, which was the first year of the pandemic.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Well, I think all of us who lived through the pandemic, which I assume is everybody here, knows that that was something that sure changed a lot of lives. You have different levels of stress. You have different control for people who can go remote, different kind of control over your work environment versus people who had to continue going into an office during a really stressful situation. So I think it'll be interesting to see what ends up happening if we can get more data in. You know, we're in a different kind of period of change now. How is that going to look to things like the recession before? So that's just a good acknowledgement. Some of our experience in terms of the factors of decline, do people believe that you're actually going to do something? Do they trust your program enough to put themselves out there? We saw the slides on retaliation and retaliation concerns tends to be the top thing. And then some of our experience at our own company, and this is consistent with other people that I've networked with, is that the type of misconduct that's been observed has shifted and changed. So for us, it's always been HR type things are the highest category, but what kind of HR concerns are coming in has shifted over time. And I think sometimes with those personalized HR type concerns, people are even less willing to speak up than they might be about something like fraud.
Justin, anything to add to that?
Yeah, Mike, I want to make a little bit of a distinction before I speak on it about rate of observed misconduct versus reporting rates. And I think they're two different things, but I think they align with the data here. I think both have declined in the data period. And I'll say that because at the companies I've worked, and I've worked with two multinational Fortune 100 companies over the last in that time frame, we don't track rates of observed misconduct. We do track reporting rates. And in both the companies since 2020, I was surprised a little bit by the data because in both companies, our reporting rates have increased since COVID and since 2020. At least in certain, overall they've increased. And I think it's important to kind of break down the employee populations to kind of really unpack that. In both companies, so I worked at FedEx before, and now I'm at Cisco now, we have very large warehouse driver populations. Smaller, I guess, office populations. Reporting rates in the warehouses and drivers, what we call our frontline employees, have increased during that time. And a lot of these are around workplace civility type cases HR, harassment, bullying, things of that nature. So we've seen that, and I think you ask any company, I don't know of any company that's seen declines in that. I do those continue to increase. And those drive general increases because that's a majority of our populations. Now, the office, I would say, the office workers, the more white collar workers, we have seen general declines in those, but that's a smaller segment of both populations, so you don't see it as much. So I was a little bit surprised. Now, as for, look, what's the cause of the overall rate of observed misconduct going down in the data? Look, I'd like to hope it's better compliance programs.
Right.
We're doing a better job of running compliance programs. We've got better awareness out there. I don't know that there's anything to back that up, but I will say this too, in the companies I work with, typically when there's macro issues or company issues where employees fear for their jobs, whether it's a reduction in force or something, our observation has been they're less likely to report because they're worried about other things. So during COVID, so much was going on. People weren't worried about reporting. They were worried about surviving. When employees have, great security in their job, such as during the Great Resignation, which I think was around the COVID time period, then they're more likely to report because they don't no fear of retaliation. They feel like they have leverage. So that's a theory. It's interesting. Look, we can unpack this 100 different ways. I think the only way that you can really theorize is based on your own company's data. And that's what we've done typically.
Absolutely. And I completely agree with you, Justin. There are a host of variables here that can contribute to this metric. But I also suspect there's the point about unethical matters being raised to and addressed by immediate supervisors and managers before contacting the organization's hotline or helpline can have an impact on this metric too. From my vantage point, many organizations are sponsoring speaking up in their communications. Katora just picked up on this just before, and bringing awareness to unethical behavior. So perhaps there's increased comfort by employees in reaching out to their immediate supervisors to address these unethical matters before they actually get officially reported. So that's another item that could be driving this metric too.
I think that's a great point. I think Katura, when we promote the ethics line, or when we promote speaking up, we always say, go to your manager first. That's the first step. If that's not feasible or your manager's part of the problem, then you can go to the other step. So we absolutely promote that. Now, I will say, I think we can do a better job of giving our managers the resources to be able to handle those concerns. And that's something that we're focusing on right now is, look, you can tell everyone to go to their manager, but if the manager doesn't know what to do with it, they're going to send them to the ethics line, So it's kind of a waste. So equipping your managers with the resources, job aids, whatever it is, the training to know how to handle those concerns when they're brought to them, I think is key.
Absolutely, it's vital. So with all these insights on ethical culture, let's turn to leading practices. And Justin, I want to stay with you for another minute or so. What are some of the emerging practices organizations can implement to elevate their messaging with respect to reporting? How do they go about it?
Yeah, look, I think the top two reasons people don't report or wouldn't report would be, one would be retaliation and one would be futility, I think is what I've seen over time. And that's what I've seen in the organizations I work in. So what can you do to kind of get around those two issues? The futility one, one thing that we've done is using real world examples, real examples from Cisco or FedEx, anonymized, obviously, but communicating those and promoting those, putting them on your ethics intranet page, putting them in a communication about, hey, this happened, this was reported, and it was a report that happened. This is what happened. Someone was disciplined, or we uncovered $1 million fraud, to show them, to almost what we call demystifying the ethics line in the process, to show them, hey, actually, if I report, something will get done. Something does happen. So that hits that futility excuse. And the other is about retaliation. And I know retaliations, it's hard to track, but consistently enforcing that message of, we don't retaliate, enforcing that through the management as well, that there's no retaliation for reporting. I think if you can try to find ways to hit those two reasons for people not reporting, I think that can help.
Katora, anything to add?
I agree with Justin. One of the things that we have experienced when we're sharing stories is just the importance of not only sharing stories that result in somebody getting fired. So we're very intentional to share stories that have a range of outcomes. I wasn't sure if I saw something that was misconduct. It sounded bad. I reported it. Some of those turn out to be something, and we take this kind of action. Some of those don't. And then it's no harm, no foul, but you aren't sitting wondering, is this person unethical? Did something go wrong? So that's just important. And then also I think about it in terms of all the messages Justin talked about, the importance of a drip messaging campaign, not just a once and done annually. Where can you tuck those kinds of messages in? Because that's how it gets in somebody's brain so that if or when they need those resources, they've got some built up confidence in them. So those are two important points. The other thing that I wanted to note is in terms of why do people report and who is willing to report. One of the things I've thought about is just the shift in generations and technology. What are the cultural expectations about when you speak up, if you speak up, why you speak up? And I think there's been an immense change if you look back over the last 50, 60, 70 years in the United States and people who grew up in our culture, but of course culture shifts over time, right? And you have people who are perhaps older who grew up with an expectation, you just put up with it. The boss is the boss. That's what happens. You don't say anything about it. You make yourself small unless or until you're the boss. And that might have been how some people, even in our workforce, grew up. Versus what you have now, I think there's been a shift where any old person can go and call out a company on social media. It can go viral. You can get a different response. And that has an impact on whether or when people are willing to speak up. You might have a cultural expectation that something will be done, but then people are going to look to their leaders, their peers to say, but how is it here? So maybe I'm willing to call out a company that I had a bad experience with on social media, but am I willing to speak up here? Is it safe? And that goes right back to what Justin said about comfort speaking up and organizational justice.
So Katora, let me just add on to that. Do you think organizations are adjusting their communications campaign for their ethics programming due to the multi-generational workforce that they have?
I suppose it's like anything else, right? It depends. This is a good lawyer answer. I'm not one, but I work with them. I think some people are, right? And some people probably aren't, but it's one of those things I think is good to think about. We've thought about that with little things. How's your training going? Are you doing long courses? Or are you doing bite-sized training? Are you doing things like TikTok style videos? Or are you expecting somebody to hang with you for 15 minutes? You know, like how is communication happening now? It's click for extra. It's short little bites of info. So are we shifting and changing? I think we should be. Do we always think about it or do we stick with what's comfortable?
And then it goes back to, the notion of being proactive, right? Instead of reactive. It's keeping pace with the changing times.
Sure.
So, Katora, I'm going to stay with you on this topic because I find this fascinating regarding effective communications. It was observed that ethical culture strength declined since 2020. How should tone at the top be amplified throughout the organization? Where does that responsibility lie within the organization?
So tone at the top is obviously important and it starts right at the very top, but you can't just leave it there. Every one of us who is a leader has some kind of responsibility. I'm guessing that anybody who works in the ethics space is similar to our company where you have a very small team that's supporting this ethics work. So if you can't partner with other people and rely on them to carry the message out, why bother? That's going to be hard to get anything done, right? And have it be consistent. So I think one of the ways to amplify that is you can have that tone at the top message. That's important. But there's very few people who are going to actually know the executives. Besides, I see their names on the internet. I hear video of them once in a while, et cetera. But when you carry that down and you do things like for us, we had this last year an extra little module. It was about 5 minutes long for leaders that talked about what is their responsibility, why are they important, the fact that for us about 80% of people, if they have a concern, have told us per our surveys that they're going to take that concern to their leader or some leader in their chain of command. And so if that happens and you're in that, what kinds of things can you and should you deal with on your own? What kinds of things should you take a partner with, whether that's HR or referring something to an investigation team? And when people are equipped to do something, and when they know the message that you're asking them to carry, and when they believe it, all of those things can work together to where that tone at the top message doesn't just stay at the top, it permeates throughout the organization.
Sure, and that allows for consistent messaging as well.
Mhm.
Justin, pivoting to you, anything to add to that?
Yeah, look, I agree wholeheartedly with Couture. I mean, the message in the middle is, frankly, it's more impactful. It always is. I mean, we are going to emulate our direct manager a lot more and kind of see that tone and feel that tone more than we do from the CEO. So I get that. I will say, though, at least for the true tone at the top, executive leadership, I believe that a bad tone at the top kind of cascades throughout the organization on its own. There's not a lot you have to do. If you've got someone at the top that's got a bad attitude about ethics and compliance, it's automatically going to poison the entire organization, or at least it's going to get deep down in the organization on its own. But the good tone at the top, unlike that, you have to be, at least the executives need to be a lot more intentional about cascading it. And that means insisting that their direct reports cover whatever ethics and compliance in town halls, in staff meetings, all of that. One thing that we've done in the past is we created some ethics and compliance talking points to share with leaders so that they could read or use in their town halls and their staff meetings. Just a couple of things. You know, a lot of leaders share lead off with safety first, which is absolutely cool and should be done. But maybe a couple of other talking points about ethics and compliance, whether it's conflicts of interest, speaking up, you know, just a couple of bullets that they can use in every meeting, and that can help cascade that message throughout the organization. One thing that we've also done, just from a practical standpoint, to figure out, you know, what is the true tone at the top in our organization and what can we do better? We've done focus groups, and this is a big topic in focus groups, where we'll get a group of employees, you know, 10 or 15 cross-functional employees, and ask them about, hey, what is the tone at the top? What do you perceive the tone at the top? Does that cascade to the middle? Does your management actually talk the talk and walk the walk as well? So you can get, to me, a lot more out of a small focus group than you can a survey. So that's a good way to really get the feel. All right, is the message cascading throughout the organization, or is it lost in translation?
So Justin, that's a very important point. I find focus groups bring a host of benefits to an organization. You know, of course, for reasons you just mentioned before, but also it serves a purpose to let employees know that the ethics team is open for discussions and to provide contact information should and if the need arises. So it also allows for almost like an unofficial awareness campaign of what
100%.
the organization is doing.
Yep. Two-way street. Absolutely.
Correct.
We're gathering information and we're also providing information. And one is just, you know, one's not any more important than the other. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. Sounds good. So we noted that culture was ranked highest from remote employees in the U.S. Trends report, then by on-site employees, followed on by on-the-road employees. And for those on the call, you can obtain the definitions of these three categories within the U.S. Trends report. I know Skip flashed up the definition on the slides earlier. But, you know, given the hybrid work model that many organizations have implemented over the past few years, how are organizations bringing about that elevated level of consistency with respect to ethics and culture programming and messaging to this new work model? Katora, I'd like to start with you on this one.
So it's going to sound a little bit like repeating what Justin and I have said, because the approach isn't necessarily different, but how you're getting new impressions. So as you have new people who come into the organization and they aren't maybe hearing somebody over the cube wall, how do you make sure that they do understand what is your group identity? What is the right thing to do? What are those new communication opportunities that you can take? So one of the things I'm going to kind of go through a little bit of just ideas that I pulled together. One of the things we've done is our group, the ethics group, has put slides in meeting starters. So these are monthly things that our communications team pulls together. And so managers, it's a pull strategy, it's a little bit of a push, but whether they use it or not is a pull. But we have these slides that give them little ethics moments. And the reason this is so important is that if you just talk about ethics with your team or compliance matters as a leader, you're reinforcing through the simple couple-minute conversation topic that you care about it, that you're approachable, that people can go to you because they know that you care about it if something goes wrong. And that can create a sort of a positive peer pressure around doing things the right way at the right time, doing the right thing just generally. And then some other channels that I pulled together, ideas that I've talked about is, you can obviously have articles. Some people do sort of a Dear Abby column type of a thing. You can have that on Slack or Yammer, or if you've got a blog kind of a setup still at your company, you can have the headline news. You can embed content and training. You can do some kind of a town hall call, team call. If somebody's doing a town hall, you can have a slide that goes in, gets to tone at the top. You can also put together ethics events. You could record them. You can have them available for later playback, ethics month, ethics week, webinars, lunch and learns, something that makes you more approachable. Even the focus groups Justin was talking about, inviting people to opt into focus groups. Even if somebody doesn't take that opportunity, they get the impression, again, that somebody cares about this. And that's just a good little thing to have in the head for people generally. So again, if or when they need it, are they going to trust you, that you're going to listen, that you're going to care?
Right, absolutely. Those are great amplification methods. Justin, over to you. Anything else to add to that?
Yeah, I'll say this. I don't think one size fits all, frankly, in communication to employee workforces. I think the medium and message is based and should be based on risk and job function. So for companies I've worked at, we call them networked and non-networked employees. Networked employees are those like me sitting behind a desk. I got computer access. Non-networked employees are the ones that do the real work, the ones driving the trucks, loading the boxes, delivering to customers. So look, on messaging, there's different ethical and compliance risks that someone behind a desk faces than a frontline employee or field. And there's different ways to get the message. They are not sitting in front of a computer. They can't take an online training. So with those employees, you really got to rely on your managers to deliver those messages in those staff meetings, those begin of day meetings. And the messaging has to be super concise because they've got a million things coming at them, a lot of different responsibilities. So absolutely, I would look the job function, whether they're remote, they're on the road, they're in the office, it needs to be risk-based, job function-based, the medium and the message.
Excellent. Great points. And I guess, as we move from practices, let's talk about the rewarding of practices, right? So I want to open up this question to both you, Justin and Katora. How can companies consider rewarding ethical, good behavior in an attempt to promote the culture of the organization and to help steer people away from unethical behavior?
I'll start off, Katura, if you want. And I'll say on this one, do as I say, not do as I do, because I don't think in companies I've worked with, we do this well yet. But look, I like things like integrity awards. I love those. I think they're good. I think they're great for employees, and I think they're good programs to help awareness and reward people, for doing good things. But I think what really will drive the needle on incentivizing compliant behavior is including compliance and ethics in performance reviews and putting it factored into bonuses. And I know sometimes that's hard to do because you got to work with your HR teams in doing that. In some HR groups, they've got their set programs and they don't want to change them. But I honestly think, that is the way to really truly incentivize compliance is if you can do that. And some companies do it a lot better than others.
Mm-hmm. I think performance reviews, are you assessing how something was done as much as assessing what was done? One of the ways I think that it can get tricky if you take something like an ethics perception survey and try to put that data in and say, okay, you're only eligible for your bonus if you're if your team thinks you're this ethical level or above, that's not helpful. You're going to drive the wrong kind of behavior with the wrong kind of leader. But one of the things that we do is we have leadership competencies, and in our performance review, so the leadership competencies aren't specifically like act with integrity, but there are elements in the definitions that get to doing the right thing the right way. And so we do have that baked right into the performance management system. I also think, again, those training stories, articles that highlight somebody making the right choices, not just what's gone wrong, but also what goes right, and holding that up. Making the right thing to do, the easy thing to do, that's something just generally broadly that you can look at your processes. So for just a small example, I'm going to be traveling internationally. We have a requirement to check in advance of traveling to make sure, can we access our email or Teams from this remote location, wherever it is, and it has to go through. Well, they have a form that they've got, so you can click on it and you can make the right thing to do, the easy thing to do, and they're reminding people in advance of sort of prime vacation season that this is an expectation. So something like that. And then those formal leadership awards, if you have some kind of good behavior, doing the right thing the right way as part of the selection criteria.
Yeah.
Mike, one more thing, and when
Okay,
what
go ahead.
Katura was talking, this came up, and really having that sense and enforcing that sense of organizational justice in your company. If someone does something wrong, consistent discipline for that. Because when someone thinks that, oh, nothing's going to be done here, or so and so did that, nothing was done, really having that feel that if someone does something wrong, that they're disciplined for it, and the discipline's consistent across the board. I think that helps as well.
Yeah, because you can't have something where somebody at a high level gets away with it. It needs to be consistently applied regardless of whom. And in certain cases, in my expectation, you would have a higher expectation of a leader to do the right thing.
And we've seen a lot more of that in the headlines. CEOs, improper relationships, it's being publicized more, which it shouldn't be happening, but I'm glad that's coming to the forefront, because I think that does have an impact on the rest of the workforce about what's right and what's not right.
Completely agree. Reward the good behavior, but also bring about consistency and consequences. I think we have time for just about one more question. I'm taking a look at the Q&A. A lot of questions are coming in. A lot of good questions are coming in. Here's a good one. How do you measure ethical culture within an organization? And look, we're going through the results of the U.S. Trends report, of ECI's GBES report. That's one way of measuring, culture across a wide span of organizations. But Katura, Justin, how can organizations measure their own ethical culture?
We use an ethics perception survey. So we run that every 2 years. We look at the trends over time. We look at the differentiation between work groups, division level or sales group level. And then the two things that I hone in on the most, and this is based on other aspects, is that comfort speaking up and sense of organizational justice. Am I comfortable bringing something forward if I have it? And if I do I actually believe that you will do what you say you're doing?
Yeah.
Yep, I agree. I mean, I don't think that's it's not something that no one's heard of. I mean, I think we all use surveys to a certain extent. I will say this about surveys. I think it's important too, and Katura, I'm be interested in your view on this. I think it's also important to break that survey down into not just organizational, but also into business units and almost, into sites. If you can really slice and dice your data, because you can have a general overall, hey, my culture is great at Cisco or FedEx, but you get down to a site level and it's absolutely rotten. So if you can really slice and dice that data down to those levels, you can really find out where am I having issues? What do I need to focus on with training or awareness or communication? So I love the surveys, but they're only as good as the data and having the data fields to where you can really, get down to the nitty gritty about, site level and frankly, location.
Well, or you can look at something like program awareness. So you could have high program awareness, but you have low comfort speaking up somewhere. Can you use the survey to figure out your hot spots and your dark spots? where people say things are fine, but when you look at it, they have a higher observation of misconduct and a lower reporting rate than somewhere else. And then you can dig in with focus groups or other methods to see what's actually happening.
Don't forget to benchmark that assessment over time. So if you conduct that survey every year and you're able to take a look at the trends within your organization, that too will provide some insight into the culture of the organization.
Mike, and that's what the board will always ask. How do we compare to others? That's a great point. I mean, not just us at our level, but they're going to ask that, and the executives will as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. So with that, I think we're just about out of time. So thank you, Katara. Thank you, Justin, for joining me here today on ECI's webinar. Everin, I'm going to turn it back over to you to close it out.
All right. Well, thank you very much to all of our presenters today. To Skip for sharing the data, and Mike and Katura and Justin for that very interesting, insightful, engaging conversation. And thank you to the audience for joining us and contributing and adding comments. And in terms of some resources, Skip, I don't know if you can pull up real quick the one slide. Just again, want to point out that in addition to the trends report, we have a lot of GBS data and research that's available on our website. So please check that out. We also have our Blue Ribbon Panel report on high quality ethics and compliance programs, which is a great resource and foundation, and really is the underlying belly of a lot of ECI's work and our framework for E&C excellence. So be sure to check that as well. We would love to hear your feedback on today's webinar, so be on the lookout for an event evaluation, and please follow us on LinkedIn. Thank you again for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next time.